Hello everyone. So I welcome you all in this lecture. So today we are going to talk about the cloud computing overview. So basically in this lecture we are going to understand some essential characteristics, the service model and the deployment models that are there in the cloud computing. So in this we are going to understand an overview of the cloud computing, and whatever the topics that we are going to discuss today will be covered in detail in the coming weeks. So let's start. Okay, so to understand the cloud computing, let us take an analogy to understand in a better way. So we'll take an analogy that we use in our day-to-day life. So let's see. Okay, let us look to these scenarios that you see on the screen. So the first scenario is we pay the local electricity provider at the end of the month. Yes, so we see that we are consuming the electricity in our house, in our offices, and the bill for our consumption to be paid at the last, means at the start of the next month we are paying for the usage that we are doing this month. So we are first consuming and then we are paying for our consumption. Similarly, when we go to any grocery store, when we go to any mall or shopping store, we just pick all the items and put it in our cart, and then we pay for the item that we have taken. Similarly, if you look to the phone, so we are using mobile phones, and you may have experienced that every time our bill is different based on our consumption. Sometimes we are paying more because we are using it more, sometimes the bill may be less. Similarly, if we talk about the vehicle, so vehicle needs fuel depending on its distance it runs. So here you can see that again here the expenses is not confirmed or not fixed. When you use a vehicle, it all depends that how much you are using or running your vehicle. So this is a kind of subscription model. So all the things that we have talked is actually based on the subscription model, and the beauty of this model is the first point you can see on the screen is customer avoid large upfront capital expenses. So the meaning of this is if you want to consume any of the services, any of the product, any of the resources, you are not going to produce it. For example, if I want to use electricity in my house, I am not going to generate the electricity. I am not going to install a generator or some smart grid that can generate the electricity. I can simply connect to the service providers, means the electricity providers, and I can start using the electricity. Similarly, if I want to consume anything from the grocery store, I am not going to manufacture it. I am not going to produce it to consume it, but I simply go and I can take whatever I want. So we are actually paying as an ongoing operational expense. So basically in this subscription model, this is a pay as you use model. That means whatever you are using, you have to pay for that. The other advantage of this model is easily and quickly scale up and down based on the business demand, and only pay for what is needed. So this is again a very good advantage of this model. We can quickly scale up and scale down. What does it mean? If let's say if the guest comes to your house for any particular time, then you may see that okay, for that month your consumptions may be increased for grocery, maybe for electricity. So you are allowed to use more electricity provided you have to pay for more usage. You are allowed to take more grocery provided you have to pay more. So that means it gives us the flexibility that we can reduce and increase our consumption based on our requirement. We are not bound to use on a fixed basis. If you are using a vehicle, if you are using a phone, we are free to use whatever is our usage. We are not bound to pay a fixed amount for using these services. So when we talk about the subscription model, it's all about renting but not buying. So whenever we look to any of the scenarios, we are actually renting these services. Means we are taking the services provided by these providers and we are paying for these services. We are actually not buying it, we are not installing it, we are not going to produce all these services in order to utilize all these services. Similarly, the cloud computing model works. Here we are using the resources. So in the cloud computing world, when we say resources, so resources means your servers, your computing powers, the storage, the networking. So all these things are basically are the resources that we are consuming, and these are the basic components that actually require to run our business. So later we will see that how these components are actually playing a part to run a business. But here in the cloud computing, we are not going to own these components. We are going to take this component on the rent basis. We are using this component and paying the charges for its usage. Okay, so let's see what's next. So now, what is cloud computing? So cloud computing nowadays is not a new term, though it is very popular. It becomes very common, and if you are aware, if you are looking about the trends, all the companies are moving to the cloud. So why they are moving to the cloud? You may be aware that many of the companies have invested a lot in their infrastructure. They have put a big amount of expense by building the infrastructure. They have purchased high powered machines, the servers, for example, if you took to the bank. So do they really need to move to the cloud? So you can say, okay, they are like having the huge infrastructures, they can deploy their own servers. But the thing here, because we are online and the customer base is keep on increasing, so the issue comes about the availability, the issues comes about the reliability. Are with the present infrastructures, are they able to provide the services all over the world? Means the customers which are actually residing all over the world, are they able to provide the services? If yes, that means they need to do a lot of duplicacy, they need to do a lot of redundancy, and they need to deploy and provide all the storage to the various part of the world. So when they are doing this kind of redundancy, that means they need to again take a lot of efforts to maintain all these storage mediums, the servers which are deployed to handle all these things. So again they have to have an extra expense to manage all these things. So why not they can just rent all these services and can avoid by the issues of managing these component or the resources. Nowadays the companies are trying to more focus on the business logic, on the business strategies, instead of spending time or the energy or the money on maintaining the resources. So again, even they have invested a lot in the infrastructures, it makes sense to move to the cloud, because the cloud give to the organization a kind of flexibility where the business or an organization can enjoy working onto the business logics, onto the business strategies, without caring for the other issues like managing the data centers, deploying the servers, doing the patchings, and all this issue that is actually required to run successfully all these data centers. That is basically a need of any business. So how we can define cloud computing? So cloud computing is basically evolved from several concepts that we have been hearing for a very long period of time, like SaaS. We heard about the utility computing, we heard about the grid computing, we heard about the virtualization, real-time infrastructures, web platforms, SOA. These are the terminology that we have been hearing for a very long time. And when we talk about the cloud computing is just an amalgamation of all these terms and giving it a new shape. So in general or roughly, the cloud basically refers to the internet, because all the services, all the features that we are going to use with the cloud are only possible with the internet. So this is a technology basically which allows keeping the application on the internet and can be accessed by using the browser. So if you look to the key terms that is defined in the definition of the cloud computing, we can see that in its definition the key terms are convenient, on demand, and sharing resources. So cloud computing basically provides a framework so that any application can be rapidly provisioned and can be released with a minimal effort. It also provides us we can say a high level of abstractions for the computation and the storage. When we talk about any business implementation, we generally worry about, or we need to care about, the service availability. We talk about the redundancies, we talk about the confidentiality issues, the compliances issues. We need to predict our customer growth. We need to think about the latency issues, the data center management, elasticity, licensing fee. So there are many issues are there that has to be taken care when we want to run our own business. Now with the cloud, so all the things that we have just that I have just used, all these things are actually taken care by the cloud providers. So this is a very huge advantage. It's a very good benefit for the customer to go for the cloud, because these are the main issues which are actually taken care by the cloud provider. So when I say the issues are taken care by the cloud provider, it does not mean that the customer or the user of the cloud does not have any responsibility. So here actually the entire things works on the sharing basis. So we have a shared responsibility model which is proposed. So this is on the screen, you can see this is a model which is proposed by the Amazon. We call it as AWS shared responsibility model, but this is a general strategy which we find in all the cloud model with all the service providers, that the responsibility is actually shared among the cloud provider and the cloud user. So if you see that basically the provider is basically responsible of the security of the cloud, and the customer is basically responsible for security in the cloud. So all the things like networking, databases, storage, computing issues are to be taken care by the cloud provider. He is responsible to make sure that everything will be fixed and will be running fine. On the other side, the customer application, the customer data, and the providing the policies, identities, and all these access issues are to be taken care by the customer. So in this way, the entire functioning, the entire structure that is required to run any business is divided among the cloud providers and the user. This model is basically distributes the responsibilities among the participating entities. So when I say participating entity means, so we have basically two entities here. One is the provider and one is the user. So this basically denotes that the cloud service providers are responsible for the security of the cloud, and the customers are basically responsible for the data they are actually putting in the cloud. So depending on the type of deployment, so we will see in the coming slides that we have three type of deployment. We call it IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Their responsibilities are determined, that what is the responsibility on each entity. So basically this model or this framework actually ensures the accountability of the customer and the cloud service provider. So now, before going more details into it, more deeper into the cloud computing, let us understand its trend. Let us understand, does it really mean to talk about cloud computing? Does it really help us to learn cloud computing? So in the figure you can see the trend, that how this cloud computing is emerging, and the companies, the organization, the businesses have actually realized the potential of the cloud computing, and they have realized that if they are not uh, uh, aligning with this cloud computing, if their business is not using the facilities provided with the cloud computing, then they are not able to compete, they are not able to run with the competition that is in the market. So if you look to the statistics, that is this is the graph which I have taken from the internet, and I have just used it to make you realize the importance and the growth that the cloud computing is actually showing. So the global computing market is forecasted to go over $650 billion by 2025, and you can see that by 2025 that almost 80% of the organizations are actually expected to move or to migrate towards the cloud. So definitely it has a huge potential. Already we can realize with this graph. This is done with the real scenario studies, and it is identified that the what are the trends of the cloud computing in the today's market. Now if you look to the providers, that who is leading in the market. So as the cloud is become the kind of need of the business, so businesses are moving to the cloud. So definitely when there is a demand, then there also we need to provide a supply. So there are many cloud providers come in the market. The leading among all the providers are Amazon, that is Amazon Web Services, we call it AWS. And then we have Azure from Microsoft Azure is there. From the Google we have Google Cloud Platform. Now these are the three leading players in the market who are actually capturing almost you can say 50-60% market, and the remaining are other like IBM is there, we have Oracle is there, Salesforce is there, but at the top we have like 35-40% market is captured by Amazon only. So Amazon is actually a very far among all the competitors. So we'll see in the coming week that what exactly is Amazon providing to us, what are the different services we can see in the Amazon, and also we will have a feel and we will learn some services which are offered by these main providers. So in our course we are mainly focusing on the Google Cloud Platform, the Microsoft Azure and the AWS. So we will be covering the services offered by the providers, keeping in mind all the three providers, but our main focus will be on the Amazon and the Microsoft Azure. Now let's have a look to the essential characteristics of the cloud computing. What exactly are the characteristics that we see in this model? So the very first thing is that we see here is on-demand self-service. So the meaning of this is it actually refers that the computing capabilities are provisioned automatically without requiring the human interaction or with any service providers. So based on your demand, the services can be provisioned and can be scaled up and down. Then second characteristic is a heterogeneous access. This basically mean it refers to the capabilities that are available over the network and promote use of the heterogeneous access. Then the next is the resource pooling. This is again main characteristic of the cloud computing model. So here all the resources or you can say the computing resources are pooled together and can be used in a multi-tenant model. Multi-tenant model means all the resources are actually available at the providers, and the resources can be make it available for many users at the same time, and the resources are dynamically assigned and reassigned according to the customer demand. And then the other is the measure service. This is again the one of the most important characteristics of the cloud computing, which actually make the interest of the organization to move to the clouds. So major services basically, here the cloud systems automatically control and optimizes the resources, which means actually it will provide the platform where one can actually analyze and predict what are the usage of the services, and the customers are only bound to pay for what they are using. So they are actually free for caring about of the upfront cost, upfront expenses. They do not need to care that how many customers will be there in the next month, and how the customer base will be keep on expanding, because if they are going to set up the infrastructure at their own organization, then they have to do a huge analysis. They need to identify that how the business will grow, and when the business will grow, what is their requirement, what is the capacity of the server they have to install, what is the storage required, and they have to do a lot of research and analysis, and accordingly they have to do all the expenses to purchase all these components and the resources. But now with the cloud model, they are actually free. They don't need to care for the customer expansion, about the resources deployment, about the management of the resources, because everything will be taken care by the cloud. So if in 1 month, if there is a less usage of any services, then they have to pay only less. If there is a more usage of any service, then they are going to pay more. So here the auto scaling up and down is actually provided here, which is one of the very good advantage of using the cloud computing. So we have basically 3 service models are there in the cloud computing. These service models are basically called as SPI. SPI, S stand for SaaS, P stand for PaaS, and I stand for IaaS model. So at this point of time, we have to only know that there are 3 models, service models are there in the cloud computing. Later we have a full discussion, we have a full kind of lecture on all these different kind of service models. So here cloud computing can be used in 3 ways. One is you can use software service, we call it as SaaS. That means you are only getting the services which are provided by the cloud. You are not allowed to deploy. You are actually free to take care of the patches, to manage your services. You are simply going to use the services which are on the cloud. So this is basically a consumption model. You are simply consuming the services which are available on the cloud. For example, Office 365. For example, you are using Gmail. For example, you are using a OneDrive. For example, you are using Netflix. Okay, so we are simply paying for the services and we are using it. Then second is the PaaS model. PaaS model basically refers to the building scenario, where the organization or the company is allowed to build their application based on the requirement, and they can do their work. So again, when I say building, means organization does not need to take care about the server configuration. They do not need to purchase the server. They do not need to purchase the storage. They do not purchase the networking. They do not need to care about the operating system. They are provided the entire platform which is required to run their application. So they are free to develop their application based on the requirement, whatever the customization they want to do. For example, in the SaaS, they are using any application. For example, they are using a Gmail they are using as a service. So whatever is provided by the provider, they have to simply use in that form. They are not allowed to customize it. But if the organization want to deploy its own application, where the organization wants to do its own customization, they want to give it a shape whatever they want, so then they can go for the PaaS. So they do not actually have a control on the server. They do not have any permission to configure the server. They are only allowed to control their application. The other resources, the supporting sources are to be taken care by the cloud, but the control is on the application and the data which goes to the application. That is a PaaS model. Then there is a IaaS model, that is called infrastructure as a service. That is a host. So host means this is basically refers to the, this is actually at the bottom layer. So if you divide all the services in terms of layers, so at the top is a SaaS, then comes the PaaS and the IaaS. So IaaS is basically is a scenario where the organization is allowed to configure its own server. So organization can go to the IaaS model. They can build their own server based on the requirement. They can do their own configuration. They can do their own networking. They can do their own subnetting. So whatever kind of infrastructure they want to design for the organization, then they are allowed to do in the IaaS model. So basically, if you look at who are actually the users or the concerned person who actually directly linked with this kind of service model, so I can say the IaaS is basically linked with the admin person, the IT guy who is actually administrating or managing the entire the structure or the network of any organization, is basically dealing with the IaaS. PaaS is basically for the person who are called as developers. So the developers, the programmers are basically the person who is handling this PaaS. SaaS can be anyone. He can be any user who just want to use the services and do their work done. So if we look to the example of this, so SaaS, as I told, we have many applications which are available online that we are using in our day-to-day life. Even if we are using for example Yandex, if you are using Yandex services, if you are using MyTaxi services, so by directly or indirectly we are in a day-to-day life using many services which are actually a SaaS service, which are available over the internet, and we are paying for the services and we are getting our work done. So when we talk about the PaaS, then we have Microsoft Azure. The web and worker roles are basically example of this. And IaaS is basically the hosting scenario where we are allowed to create the virtual machine. So the best example of IaaS is the EC2, that is provided by the AWS. So at this point of time, we are only required to just understand that we have three different models provided by the cloud. They are IaaS, PaaS and SaaS. What exactly they are, how it looks like, how they work, what are the different properties of these models will be discussed in later. Similarly, we have basically three deployment models, you can say, we are having. One is called public cloud, means how these cloud services can be deployed. So one is public cloud, then the private cloud and the hybrid cloud. So public cloud is something, a multi-tenancy model where the services are actually the resources are kept at the cloud service provider, and the resources are to be used in a multi-tenant model where many users can be using the same resource. Private cloud is basically provides you more privacy, more kind of security. It does not allow to share the resources with the other parties, so it's a kind of single tenant model. And hybrid cloud, as the name suggests, it is basically a combination of public and private. So generally most of the companies are going for public and private because both deployment model have their own advantage. So they want to take advantage of both the models and they want to utilize in their own business. So far we have discussed that what exactly is the cloud computing, how we define the cloud computing, the definition. We discussed about its important characteristics. We talk about the service model. We talk about deployment model. So now we have just a small understanding and overview of the cloud computing. So let's move to the next part.